Today we're going to be talking about writing, and we're going to be dissecting some prompts today. The first thing we need to do is read the prompt and determine which type of writing it is. So let's do a little review. Remember, there's argument writing, there's informative writing, and there's narrative writing. So let's look at the first prompt. What impacts did the bombing have on the city? Use details from the passage to support your response. Well, I'm trying to determine, is this an argument, is this a narrative, or is this an informative prompt? Remember, argument, a lot of times they'll tell you to argue, or you have to choose the side, and you have to read, find evidence for either side. So from looking at that prompt, I know it's not an argument prompt. Remember, narrative, you're either having to rewrite it from another character's point of view, or you're having to continue the story, or write a sequel to it. Well, I don't see anything about writing a story, so we know that this has to be an informative prompt. And remember, with informative writing, we use the racist strategy, but we have to first identify the jobs. So let's look, and let's look for our verb here. Well, our verb is what, and let's look at our keywords here. Impacts, and so we're looking for the word impact. Impact means, how did it affect? Did the bombing have on the city? So let's look at this, how many jobs it would be. Well, there's a key word here. When you have to read these prompts, it's very important to look for these plural words. Impacts. Impacts means more than one. If they wanted one, they would say, what impact did the bombing have on the city? In this case, they said impacts. So there's more than one impact that it had on the city. So that means that we know this will at least be 2 jobs. Okay? And now, if you'll notice when it says use details from the passage to support your answer, when we use race, we know that's our citing evidence and our explaining. So we're already going to do that process. So pretty much, when we answer this question, we know that we're going to have to race it, and it's going to have 2 jobs. The first job would be one impact, and the second job would be another impact. Now, there could be 3 if there were 3 impacts. All right, let's look at the second prompt. What is the character's major conflict? What message is sent from the way it is resolved? Use details from the passage to support your response. Well, when you look at this, once again, you'll notice when you read it that they're not asking us to write a story or write it from another character's point of view, and they're not asking us to argue anything. So once again, this would be an informative prompt. Let's look at our verbs. One would be what, and I keep saying what. Well, let's look at the first one. What is the character's major conflict? Well, there's a key word there, conflict. Okay? What message is sent from the way it is resolved? Well, first of all, you've got to know what conflict means. Well, we know conflict means the problem. So once we've looked at our verbs, let's see how many jobs this is going to be. Well, I know that this is going to be 1 job. So I'm going to, in my first paragraph, I'm going to have to race the major conflict. I'm going to have to know what the conflict is and give evidence of that and explain it. And then my second job, what message is sent from the way it is resolved? Well, what message? That means, like, what's the lesson is sent from the way it is resolved? Well, you have to know the lesson, and you have to know how the problem is resolved. So there is a second job. So there would be 2 paragraphs. You would put the first paragraph, race what the conflict is. The second one, how the message shows that it is resolved. Now remember, using details, you're going to do that in both of the paragraphs when you race it, when you give your evidence and you explain. So, let's look at the third one. You want to do this one?
All right, so let's look at this one. This is writing from a character's point of view. A lot of times you'll see that it asks you to write from a different point of view than what they've given you in the passage. This one says, rewrite the scene from Byron's point of view. Make sure to include specific details, dialogue, and facts. All right, so let's look at this. All right, so rewrite, we know that re means again. Okay, the scene from Byron's point of view. That means how he feels. Okay, that's what we're talking about there. Specific details. Okay, so what it means by specific details is you're looking for those things in the text. Maybe it said something specifically about Byron. You want to turn around and use that in your writing. Dialogue, that's when you use your quotation marks to, like if Byron said, and then I would put in quotation marks what he says. And then just facts, going back to the passage and pulling out things about Byron. And then we actually have one of these that we're going to post as an example. Ms. Hicks, you want to do the argumentative?
Sure. You want to help me?
Yep.
So let me, on narrative with this, and y'all can correct me if I'm wrong, but I really stress to use the story, and when she says specific details, you've basically got a story set there for you.
You pick the main ideas from the story,
Yes.
but then, for example, in this one, this came from a book actually, and it was told from the brother's point of view, Kenny's point of view, and they're having to rewrite it from another character. So you have to look and think about how that character, you have to know what you know about that character's personality, and you would take the same central ideas and you would just write it from his viewpoint.
Yeah, like the setting would be the same.
But yes. The conflict is still going to stay the same.
Right.
But how someone views it will change.
Well, and it would be like if you, maybe you and your sister are trying to tell a story. Well, each of you are going to tell it in your own words the way you saw it happen. So that would be according to your point of view.
Usually I tell you to go through the story and kind of underline the story elements, the things that are going to stay the same.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So, I was trying to move that up.
Okay.
This one says, write an argumentative essay justifying whether or not size has an impact on education. Support your claim using evidence from the text. Okay, well, let's look. We know that, like Ms. Swearingen said, write is your verb. You're going to write an argumentative essay, and you're going to have to justify. Now, what are we justifying? Whether or not class has an impact on education. Then you're going to support your claim using evidence from the text. One thing, so your job is going to be, one, to write an argumentative essay justifying. And when you support your claim, you have to make sure that your evidence is relative to whatever you're going to have to decide which side you are on. Does the class size have an impact or does it not? So that's one thing. And I often say, look for what evidence is the strongest. If you have the strongest evidence for yes, it has an impact, then use that.
You can't just decide based on which one you like.
Right.
You have to use the one that has the most evidence. So you have to actually look at both sides and usually compile a list or highlight the evidence and see which one has the strongest.
With,
yes.
Both of your
a T-chart works great.
So
Pros and cons.
or class
or impact or not impact or something.
Yeah, impact, no impact.
Yeah.
And then you would take your evidence from your article and see where has the most evidence. And that's how it's going to be easier to write on it, I mean, in my opinion.